This is Comic Geek Speak 1609, Book of the Month, Preacher, Book 1.
And welcome to the show. I'm Brian Chrisman.
I'm Adam Murdo.
I'm Chris Eberly.
And I'm Bill Ellis.
All right, and this is our Book of the Month on, as Bill so eloquently said, Preacher, Book 1. This is going to cover the Preacher issues 1 through 12, which I believe is the first three storylines.
Mm-hmm. What is contained in the first volume of the most recent series of hardcovers/trades that DC Vertigo has put out.
Correct.
We should point out, as Murd just mentioned, DC has been repackaging a lot of its Vertigo titles that are in trade. So, whereas Preacher was, I want to say it was originally 9 volumes?
That's
9
correct.
volumes, yeah.
Yeah, now they've repackaged, what is it, Billy, 5 or 6?
6 books.
Yeah, 6 books. So then they're doing that with all their Vertigo titles now, really, gradually over time. So
They've done that with Lucifer and Ex Machina. They're working on Why the Last Man is almost done.
So, just if you're shopping, just bear that in mind.
I guess we decided a couple months ago to want to do Preacher, because the Preacher TV series on AMC has just debuted. This is not going to be talking about that pretty much at all, just concentrating on this first collection.
Yes. Bill, have you and Danielle seen the first episode of Preacher yet?
Yep, we watched it last night. And it is definitely going to be different from the book, but I'm definitely going to be watching it.
Okay, because Pants and I have not seen it yet.
Right.
So. It's really quite good. It keeps the spirit of the book very, very alive while taking you on a completely different journey. Like, you recognize familiar things, but they're using them in new ways. So it's
interesting. Okay.
And Cassidy nailed him.
All right.
Once they got that actor attached, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He's just an amazing Cassidy.
Look forward to it.
All right.
He even had the sunglasses. I think there was some concern that he lost the sunglasses along the way, but he's got them.
All right, so we may have a bigger discussion on the TV show in the future. And also in the future of this episode, hopefully, we'll be joined by Danny. We'll be coming in a little later. Shane couldn't make it tonight, so it's just be us we have on us right now. And, of course, spoilers for the first trade for Preacher. And, of course, with our Book of the Months, they are brought to us by
InStockTrades.com. Speaking of trades, it's your place to go on the internet for big, big bargains on collected editions of comic books, hardcover, softcover, you name it. They're there for you. And if you see it on the website, it's guaranteed in stock, hence the name. If you go to their website at InStockTrades.com, you'll find they have a short list of deals of the week set up there that are 50% off. So you've got Superman Adventures featuring some, I believe, some Mark Miller stories in there. There's a Symmetry trade paperback. There's a Green Lantern, New Gods, Godhead trade paperback. And on the right-hand side of the front page of their website, they always have a list of their top 10 bestsellers. Shane and I always like to shout out those just for the listeners' interest whenever we do an In-Stock Trades sponsored episode. So number 10 on their top sellers list right now is Lazarus Hardcover, Volume 2.
Incredible.
Yep, well-deserved, as Chris will tell you. All New X-Men Hardcover, Volume 4 is at the number 9 spot. Number 8 is We Stand on Guard, Deluxe Hardcover.
Outstanding.
Yep, also got the Eberly seal of approval. Number 7 is The Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus, Volume 1, new printing.
They did go the whole run.
Mm-hmm. Very early stuff. That's 45% off. Number 6, Kingdom Come 20th Anniversary Deluxe Edition hardcover.
I got chills.
That was 1996, wasn't it? Making us all feel old. Top seller number 5, Scalped hardcover. Book 4 Deluxe Edition. Really hitting a lot of...
Jason Aaron begins the march to glory.
Hitting a lot of Chris's C-spots here. Daredevil by Wade and Somni. Volume 5 hardcover. Number 3, Uncanny X-Men Omnibus hardcover, Volume 1, a new printing.
Claremont, Cockrum, and Byrne, baby. There we go.
That's the stuff. A little bit of Len Wein, too, I believe.
That's right. Forgive me. That's true.
Gotham Central Omnibus hardcover. Brubaker, Rucka, and Michael Lark. Good stuff there. I've been told anyway. That's a series that I've recently decided I need to be collecting.
Murd, that's a book. Magnificent police procedural in the DC universe. Tremendous.
Yep, I will be checking it out. And number 1 right now at InStockTrades.com is Guardians of the Galaxy by Abnett and Lanning Omnibus Hardcover. And all 10 of these things are 45% off right now at... Oh, actually, I misspoke. The number 10 selection is only 42% off. We Stand on Guard is also 42%. But all 10 of these are either 42 or 45% off at InStockTrades.com. Go and check out the bargains they have to offer you on collected comics.
Excellent. I have for quite a while not really participated in Book of the Months because it's not something that I really care to get into. My reviewing skills are quite lax. However, says a lot of people. Indeed. Says that the word on the street is. But anyway, I really want to talk about Preacher and more hear what everybody else's experiences with Preacher. So if I'm wrong for this format, forgive me. I just want to start out that I got back into comics around like 89, 90, and I completely missed Preacher 100%. It was nowhere on my radar, didn't know anything about it. It was years before I even really caught up on it. Got the first trade at one of, I think, Chris's Wild Pig sales maybe like 5 years ago. Read the first one. Had trade 2, didn't read it till actually around Christmas time when I started reading everything from Preacher. We got the trades sent to us from Rob Anderson, one of our listeners. So I've read the whole series right now, and I'm ashamed that I didn't read it at the time. So good, so well illustrated. Having Ennis and Dillon on the main title for the entire run was clearly a smart move. No fill-ins. There were some other spinoffs that had the same writer but different artists. Just wonderful book, wonderful start. The first issue was a great start. Everything you need was in the first issue, more or less. And I'm just so angry it took me so long to read this. I really enjoyed this, and I'm curious to hear what everybody else's stories is on Preacher.
All right, let's pen to me next.
Okay,
I'm the Preacher virgin in the group. Okay. Shane and I were going to bear that burden together, but family obligations keeps him from participating tonight. So I get to be the lone virgin up here. But Shane will share his thoughts on Preacher eventually, I'm sure. This is the first time I've read any of this material. When it first came out back in 1995, I'm thinking it was.
Yes.
I was a mere lad of 16, and I don't believe the comic shop I frequented at that time had a policy not to sell suggested for mature reader Vertigo titles to minors. So I would not have been able to read it even if I'd wanted to. Certainly I saw the solicitations for it, and I thought to myself, this does not look like something that a conscientious, church-going young lad of 16 really wants to meddle with. And reading it now, I think it probably would have been a little much for the 16-year-old me. So I don't really share your self-recrimination, Brian, at having not read this as it was coming out.
Okay.
I think it's a good thing that I've waited as long as I have, because now I can handle it. I can come to it with a bit more of a level head. I think my faith has deepened and strengthened enough that it can take a few pot shots from Ennis and Company. But I was aware of Preacher as it was being published. I mean, it was one of Wizard Magazine's pet series, and they gushed about it quite frequently. And so from write-ups there, I was able to learn a few things about the characters of Jesse Custer, Tulip O'Hare, Cassidy, the hard-drinking Irish vampire, Arseface, Hairstar, and other members of our cast of characters. And I thought, okay, this sounds awfully bawdy, and it's something that maybe I'll dip into when I'm a little older. So when I was in college, I did eventually pick up a copy of the first trade, the original edition of the trade, which was issues 1 through 7. And I had it in my possession for at least 15 years, and I kept looking at it and thinking, nah, not now. But finally, this was the occasion. And I thought, let's extend a little extra thanks, too, to our friend Rob Anderson of Panda Dog Press for having sent us his copies of all 9 of the first series of trades. He was moving, and he was going to give them to Goodwill otherwise, or to a library. And so he just thought, I'll send them to the CGS guys. So thank you very much, Rob. You are sort of an unofficial second sponsor of this episode. And without your help, I'm sure we would have gotten around to doing a Book of the Month episode on Preacher eventually. I'm surprised it took us 11 years as it is. But thank you for precipitating this episode that we're doing right now. All right. So having finally gotten around to reading the first couple installments of Preacher here, the first, I guess it would be like whatever's covered by the original, the first 2 of the original trades is up to like issue 17.
The first 1.5.
Yeah. Yeah, it's up to 17.
Well, I've read the first 2 of the original trade, so I've read past our stopping point for this episode.
Yeah.
We're only talking about 1 through 12, but I think...
Correct. 17.
Yep, correct.
Okay, so I've read the first 17 issues. And I think what I'd read about it in Wizard prepared me pretty safely for it. As I've said, I think I was more entertained and less scandalized by it than I would have been if I'd read it at 16. Ennis is... This is kind of the series that made Ennis's name. He'd had a couple of DC titles that he wrote before this. He did a run on Hellblazer. He had The Demon, which is more of a DC Universe title. But Preacher was like the first American creator-owned comic on which he was able to really cut his teeth and just go crazy and tell whatever story he wanted to tell with whatever characters he could come up with on his own initiative. And the end result is actually pretty impressive. I think of there are a couple of comments that Joe R. Lansdale in his intro to the first trade volume are germane to what we're going to be saying here. One of them is this Preacher, pretentious it ain't, but smart it is. So Ennis just avoids a lot of the sort of artsy-fartsy pretension that inflicted several Vertigo publications of the early 90s, and he went straight for the blood and guts and the grit and the sex and all of that stuff. And some of it was pretty clearly gratuitous, just intended to entertain, but a lot of it was more than that. Ennis was doing all of this with a couple of points to make in mind, and I appreciate that. He's got a couple of interesting things going on here. He's trying to to paint a picture of American manhood in many different manifestations, for one thing. He's addressing the myth and legend of the Old West, both historical, the myth of the West of history, the West of rumor, and the West of popular culture, film, and so forth, hence the spirit of John Wayne sauntering around. And there's also a nice little love story between Jesse and Tulip, of course. And obviously there's a pretty heavy dose of religious satire. That's probably the main point he's making with the series as it goes on. I think all of this can be tied under the umbrella of, what Preacher is more than anything else to me anyway, is a tall tale. It's an example of that uniquely American narrative form, relies heavily on flamboyant exaggeration and sort of the canonization of local folk heroes in the form of rough-hewn, homespun myth-making. And this is definitely an exaggerated story happening here. Lots of things that are way over the top in a couple of different ways. And we're talking about a preacher man from Texas who's possessed by the spawn of an angel and a demon and goes on a walkabout around the nation and the world trying to hunt down God and hold him accountable to all of his believers whom he has abandoned by quitting and clearing out of heaven. It sounds like the kind of thing that somebody like a Pecos Bill or a Paul Bunyan would do. So that to me, that is the storytelling vein that Ennis is employing here, and he's doing it to great effect. And I will echo what you've already said about the art, Brian. It's Dillon's artwork is just... It's as versatile as it is gorgeous. It's just as sharp and as beautiful as a pearl-handled hunting knife, which is just what you need for a series like this. And he's able to keep up. Dillon is able to keep up with Ennis trick for trick. Whatever territory Ennis roams into, be it geographical or topical, emotional or thematic, that artwork can keep up with him. It's loose enough to go cartoonish for the sort of broad, brutal satire and blood and guts comedy that Ennis goes in for, but it can also tighten itself up and turn serious, on a dime, just to support pathos and human drama. He can convey real, quiet motions of human emotion, and he can also show people's brains being splattered on the wall, with equal aplomb. And we also need to give a little bit of a shout-out to the livid, vivid hues of Matt Hollingsworth, the colorist, who is not afraid to be bold and bright with his color palette in a time when there's the preferred color scheme for Vertigo titles, the house palette, if you will, was more like beiges, grays, and browns. He dips into the gaudier stripes of the rainbow, and it really makes the book that much more visually enjoyable for it. So, yep, I have read these first 12-plus issues. I've not been driven away as of yet. I'm really quite intrigued, and since we've got the entire series right here in front of us, I will absolutely be reading more of it. But now let us hear from the Preacher veterans on the line.
Billy, go ahead.
I don't know what to say. Even past Merds, he pretty much summed it all up.
I'm sorry, I did it again.
Oh, that's okay. It was thorough. It was excellent. Yeah, Preacher is like 100 shaggy dog stories fighting each other to death in the middle of the Utah desert.
That's a great image.
This book is all characters. And one of the most fun things that I personally take away from it is listening to those characters tell their tales. There's almost every single issue. There's like 2 pages dedicated to some weird walk-on character telling their life story in some very amazing, frank, just really awesome way. That's got to be the part that I enjoy the most, definitely. Yeah, aside from that, I don't know where else to go. You know, you got the wacky violence. Mm-hmm. You got Steve Dillon's art. Actually, I was talking to Danny about this. She picked the perfect word to describe the art that he uses for this book, which is almost intentionally ugly, because of the ugliness of the world that it depicts. I haven't encountered Steve Dillon's art in anything else the same way I have in Preacher. It's really beautiful line work, the heaviness of the lines, and just their solidity. I've seen some of the stuff that he's done for Wolverine Origins, and it just wasn't the same. So this book is one in a million for the art and for the story. There was nothing else like it at the time. It is completely unique. That's all I have to say. I'm sure I'll have more to add in.
Well put, Billy.
Well, now, Bill, how did you come to Preacher? Did you read it when it first came out?
No, I didn't. I was working in a comic book store, but I was very young. I knew of it, and I'd flipped through some issues and was drawn to it, but I didn't get to read it in its entirety until I was in college. During which I read the entire 9 volumes in a single night.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then slept through class in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was an experience. And the book it's so moving. Once I start it, I can't stop it. It really is it just takes hold of me, and I gotta get through the whole thing before I go on to something else.
Well, to piggyback on what Billy was saying, in terms of the addictive quality of when it comes to reading Preacher, from a retail perspective, I'm sure Bill can echo this. When someone comes into the shop, and once we've sized them up what kind of reader they might be, and we give them Preacher Volume 1, almost without fail, they're back for the rest. Mm. This is a series that my wife has read this, and many people who, when I know their sensibility, when I give them this book to read, they read the whole thing. And I'm sure Bill has had the same experience in the store more than once.
Oh, definitely.
This is when we talk about evergreen, mm-hmm. This is the star on top of the evergreen. This is a book that never fails, with rare exception, unless someone is very religiously sensitive or something like that. They're going to go in for this book and now for me to build on what I just said, for me this is one of the most moving finite comic series I've ever read. It's definitely one of my all-time favorite finite series. And as you mentioned, Pants, first of all, you've got the same creative team and their vision throughout the entire series. And you rarely see that in a finite series.
Yeah, it can't be overstated enough.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail right on the head because and I can understand why Bill read the whole thing in one night during his Devil May Care college days, because once you get into this world, it absorbs you immediately. And I mean, to start with the chronology for me, so I was introduced. This came out in '95, and I read it not necessarily right from the first issue, but maybe I read one trade, then I started buying the monthly. So I read most of it in the monthly format. And by the time it ended, which I want to say was 2000 or 2001, something like that.
Episode issue 66 came out, cover date October of 2000.
Thank you, sir. So I had a shop by then, so I was getting the last few issues in the store as they were coming out. This was in my wheelhouse right away. I mean, as Murd mentioned, first of all, it's the way it addresses the Old West. And we talk about American history, and just when you talk about the mythos of the Old West and the place it has in sort of our actual history, and then sort of the myth of American history, And I think Ennis really tackles that in a very effective and poignant and unvarnished way. And I think what epitomizes that is how he uses the ethereal presence of John Wayne in this story. Now, I have a complicated relationship with John Wayne in terms of his movies. I grew up in the late 70s and 80s, and John Wayne movies were on Chat TV all the time, especially on weekends, and on like local like WPIX and channels like that. And I watched as many as I possibly could. I'd watch with my father, my grandfather, and many of them I fell very much in love with. And to this day, The Searchers is one of my all-time favorite movies, period. But as I got older and I started to read more about John Wayne himself and learn more about American history, I saw the divergence between the myth of John Wayne and the reality of John Wayne, who frankly was a warmongering chicken hawk, who I don't really admire at all. But in terms of the myth that he presented on film, that still captivates me in certain films. The Searchers is especially so. That's actually one of his most complicated roles, in my opinion. And I love how Ennis applies that myth, because Jesse Custer, when I see him watching John Wayne as a kid, that reminds me of when I was a kid and how taken in I was by the world of his films. And, like in many, not all, but in many cases, sort of the black and white aspects to them in terms of, the good guys, the bad guys. Now, some of the movies are more complicated, like The Searchers, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, for example, which are both classic John Ford films. But I love how Ennis tackles that myth of the American West. Now, Jesse Custer in his journey, because he grew up watching those films too, so he kind of is moving through his quest to the United States and beyond, searching for God, and he's carrying that sort of that mythos with him. It informs how he dresses, how he walks, how he speaks, sort of his code of honor. And in this story, I find that as his character develops throughout, he's far more John Wayne than the real John Wayne ever was. And so that affects me deeply. Now, beyond that, what I love about Preacher, I should mention Garth Ennis is one of my all-time favorite comic book scribes. Bill will attest, anytime anything he does comes out, it's on my order list right away. It's usually his books are on the top of the pile for whatever week they come out. I think his military history comics are just – they have no equal. And I'd like to one day review Enemy Ace, for example, on this program. Oh. I think that's one of his finest efforts. But this is my introduction to Ennis. I hadn't read Hellblazer, like Murd mentioned that. That's precedes this. I had never read his work on Demon. I don't even know if I'd heard of him actually, and that's to my detriment, not no fault of anybody else's. So when I started reading this, I was so deeply moved because I understood even then, but even more so as I got older, that Preacher, and really a lot of Ennis's work, Hitman as well, yes, there's the ultra violence and the fun, tawdry humor and the incredibly dark humor, all of which is very much up my alley. But when you not look past it because it's all part of it, when you go deeper than that, his stories are very much morality tales, and there's a strong moral center to his stories. And I think The Preacher, why it moves me so much is it's a story about loyalty to the people in your life who you love, to your friends. It's a story about honor and your sense of honor. It's a story about love when it comes to love with your family, love with your parents, your lover, your girlfriend, wife, whoever. And it's also a story about faith. And I'm someone, and this is just my personality, I am someone who completely rejects blind faith in all its forms. I find it actually quite disturbing from an historical perspective on so many levels. And what I appreciate about Preacher is that, for me, Ennis is addressing the concept of what is faith? What does it mean to have faith? And faith in what? Is it faith in a God? Is it faith in your significant other? Faith in an organized religion? And as Mert said, there's a lot of satire going on in here. But even deeper than that, this is a story I think with a very strong secular, I think ultimately moral perspective. And if there's any book that was written for me, this is the comic book, essentially. Besides Priest, Black Panther, of course. So
yes.
I've been very excited to talk about this. And you guys mentioned Steve Dillon. One thing I want to start off the bat about Steve Dillon, I don't think anyone more hell number one. I don't think anyone more perfectly captures the shock and disbelief in the face of someone who's been shot the way Steve Dillon does.
Oh, that's magnificent!
In a way that it's funny and horrifying all at the same time. Like in the when Tulip shoots that guy in the car,
yes,
and he shoots off the bottom. Like Bill's laughing because it's funny, and the guy's eyes just agog, like what the hell just happened to me, and it's hilarious. But it's also frightening at all the same time. And no one, as you go through the whole series, no one captures that look of just shock and disbelief that, oh, God, I've just been terribly wounded better than Steve Dillon. And, of course, Arseface is his masterpiece.
Yes.
So, we'll get into all of that. But this is a book I'm really pleased and honored to be addressing tonight. By the way, Pants, you'll appreciate that I have 3 sketches by Steve Dillon that hang in our store.
I've probably seen them, yes.
Tulip, Arseface, and Cassidy. Now, this is at a show in New York City right around the time when Preacher first came out, so the mid-'90s. I don't remember where the show was. It's no longer a show that's being run. And I went there with my dear old friend, Ryan, who you know, and also Randy Roscoe, co-founder of Wild Pig, with me. Dillon was doing sketches for free for everybody in the line.
Wow.
Now, this is like 1995, 1996. I don't know if you'd ever see that today. But, I got Tulip and Randy got Cassidy, Ryan got Arseface. They just donated in the store. But I treasure those sketches. And they were free.
Yeah.
So, it's wonderful.
Now, Danny, is Danny on the line now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right.
Splendid.
So we've just started giving our opening thoughts, Danny. How did you first come to Preacher, and what are your initial thoughts of the book?
Oh, wow. When did I first come to Preacher? I don't know. Probably late 90s, I'm assuming.
So
probably,
before it ended, though. Okay.
What?
Before it ended, you actually were reading some Preacher then.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I was reading it like when it was, I think, coming out, but I think I was were the trades coming out when it was coming out? I can't even remember.
At least the early ones were, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
So I think I read the early ones, and then I was just waiting I started trying to pick up single issues, and then it wasn't worth it, and then I just waited for the trades. Interesting, I loved it when I read it back. That was probably when I was, late teens, early 20s, and then rereading it, the first trade and a half, it didn't hold up as well for me as I've gotten older. I feel as if I've not grown out of it, but it just didn't hold the same weight that it used to. It felt like it's definitely a product of its time. I don't think it holds up as well as I thought it would.
Daniel, let me ask you a question. Now, this came out in 95.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this book also worked at the time because it was very much in the era of Tarantino breaking?
Yes. I absolutely think it has. I think the reason why it was so popular, like Bill and I were discussing this last night, so I don't know if he talked about it at all. Okay. We were talking about last night that it seems around that time, this probably broke a lot of ground because it was so violent and so out there and so over the top. Like, I don't think a lot of things existed like this at that point.
No.
And, I lump it together with like Transmet, where it's just crazy off the cuff, very ridiculous. It's around the same time that I guess Kevin Smith started coming out with his movies, which were different and very vulgar. I was actually thinking about this too. People refer to, this is completely wrestling. They refer to the Attitude Era of like the 90s and late 90s. Like I'm curious what was going on in the world at that point that made, like, bringing up Tarantino, that does make sense. Like there's definitely a time of just this over the top violence that was reflected in our
vulgar aesthetic.
Yeah, in our pop culture. And I really think that this is a product of it. Or just, it came out at that time. So it was so groundbreaking and this ridiculousness. And now rereading it, I kept going like, this is so juvenile. Like, there were times where I just went, this dialogue is so vulgar and juvenile and stupid. I can't believe I'm reading this.
There is a reason why Wizard was so fond of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not to say that it was bad, but I do think at the time it was amazing, but I don't think it holds up as well as I thought it would. I think, the morals and the storyline, but to me, certain aspects, the overtop violence, the language that's used, it's just a little too much for me now, I think.
Oh, if I can build on that.
Certainly.
It was like Chris was saying, this was your first introduction to Garth Ennis. This was same with me. This reread, I do have to admit, because, of course, you said, we're doing the first 2 trades, so I read the whole thing. This reread was a little bittersweet for me, though. And I think it's because I don't think I stuck with... I mean, I've read a lot of Garth Ennis, and I love, love, love Preacher. I love this book. I don't think I will ever not love this book. But I feel like Garth Ennis hasn't grown that much from doing this book. And reading this through the lens of history, knowing all the things that he was going to go work on afterwards, the boys and the red team and all this stuff. Like, I feel like he hasn't really progressed that much past the antics writing, and past the shocking and gross. So
I don't think that's the case in his military comics, Billy.
His military comics stand apart, and he's still the best military writer of anybody working in comics right now.
It's the genre that he's most inclined to take seriously, I think.
Yes. And that's the stuff that I actually enjoy reading more from him, because it doesn't have some of the antics and as Danny was putting it, some of the juvenile language. Nobody's in a police station complaining about how the coffee tastes like semen. But I think my other favorite work by him was his Punisher Max run, and purely for the Punisher bits, because the Punisher was a no-nonsense soldier, and some funny things would happen occasionally, but...
I think Punisher Born's one of the greatest war comics ever done.
Oh, definitely.
Frankly. It's a masterpiece.
Garth Ennis treats war with gravitas, and that's what I most enjoy reading from him. It's when you get into the other stuff, and the silly sexual stuff. I know this is past this book of the month, but when you get to the Jesus Desaad storyline, I just check out because it's just too ridiculous.
Fantastic. God, I'm so glad you're here.
Me too, because I think you guys have articulated for me another reason why I'm kind of glad I waited until now to read this stuff. Because, it's as you've said, it's as the culture has grown more and more in this direction, we've all collectively become a little desensitized to this stuff. So the edge of the original material has dulled a bit for us, but for a reader like me, that's actually kind of a good thing. And good call on the Tarantino influence, too.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about, all right, when this, I forgot the exact year I saw it was 95 when I checked the copyright. I thought, okay, so 95, Pulp Fiction was 92, I believe, or 93. You got True Romance around that time. Natural Born Killers from Oliver Stone is around that time, which is a way over-the-top, ultra-violent film.
Yeah.
I think Danielle mentioned Kevin Smith, correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
Like Clerks was 93 or 94. In fact, I think Kevin Smith does an introduction, one of the early trades.
He
Actually.
does.
He does.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think Mallrats was 95, something like that. So I think Danielle has a good point. It's kind of like all this stuff is in the zeitgeist of the popular culture of that time. And I agree with her that, that kind of depiction of violence, well, you can go back to films like The Wild Bunch, for example. It wasn't like it was completely new, but you were seeing it in a way that really was I remember how startling it was for people at the time. Like when you went to see Pulp Fiction for the first time, I mean, people were just floored by that film, or Reservoir Dogs prior to that. And the way those characters spoke in those movies, and all the pop culture references, for example. And I think Preacher, and not to take away from what Ennis is doing, because this is clearly he and Dillon's own vision, but I think it's definitely part of that milieu, so to speak. So
I think I remember at the time seeing this work described somewhere in the fan press as pulpit fiction. Great pun. I don't think I can take credit for it, but great pun.
Actually, when did Kevin Smith's Dogma come out? If we're if we're thinking of things that are
that
almost
was early 2000s.
yeah, that's my least favorite Smith film.
Yeah.
Yeah. Late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I think I was like 19 or 20 when it came out.
That might have been inspired by this, so the cycle continues.
Yeah, it's 1999 that came out.
That's what I would have guessed. And then Jay and Silent Bob strikes back 2 years later, 2001.
All right, do you want to jump into the first issue?
Certainly,
Any other opening comments they want to make?
No, I don't know how much guys want to go in depth in issue by issue, because I let you guys do what you want here. But yeah, I think it was a very good first issue. How it just introduced everything in the way it was told, with the flashbacks, and then the introduction of most of the main characters you're going to see over the first arc.
Well, I like how they use the narrative framing device of having the three main characters sitting together in the diner, and they're recounting what happened that the reader hasn't actually seen yet. Mm-hmm. And they kind of take you – it's a good narrative device. They take you through how the characters all come together. And I was also fascinated now and then by Ennis's depiction of the hierarchy in heaven, and how there these various types of angels, and almost like this futuristic installation where the Genesis being has broken out from. And right away – and especially now, because I haven't actually read this story since I first read it in the 1990s, like this first arc. My favorite arc in Preacher is War in the Sun, which is a couple arcs down the road from what we're looking at now, and I've read that more than once. But I was just really, as I read this again, I was absorbed by it right away. I couldn't put it down. I think I read the whole book in one night. One thing I like about what he's doing here is that Ennis isn't afraid to play with caricature, which can be clumsy, depending on how you do it. But, like the sheriff is like every good old boy, badass, white trash Southern sheriff you've ever seen in TV or film. But again, as Murd mentioned before, Ennis is definitely going after archetypes in this story. And, that sheriff, you've seen that sheriff 100 times in different types of media. Mm-hmm. And not being a fan of people like that, I really enjoyed his fate in the story. And I enjoyed how Ennis sort of attacked some of these archetypes. But what I loved from the get-go was, first of all, Cassidy is automatically captivating and remains one of the most compelling characters in the whole saga, especially as we know going forward, there is a lot more to him than meets the eye as a character. And what I also found most compelling and still to this day, and terrifying and riveting, is the Saint of Killers, which I think is one of Ennis's greatest concepts, basically. So, those are some of my initial thoughts on the first issue. Murd, you read this for the first time. What did you think of issue 1?
I'm afraid to open my mouth now. I want to leave some things on the table for other people to discuss. I'm gun shy now.
Nonsense.
Sorry about that.
No, it's I who's sorry, Bill.
We'll have a bit more of a tete-a-tete.
All right. Well, I agree with Chris that the diner scene is an effective framing device, and it's further evidence of the Tarantino influence, since he seems to enjoy depicting skullduggery being plotted or discussed in a diner setting. It's also something of a Vertigo tradition, just thinking back to Sandman and what Dr. Destiny accomplished in a diner one day.
Ah, yes.
The portrayal of the heavenly host as a bunch of self-interested, ineffectual, bungling bureaucrats. Well, it's almost like a little caste system. It's like the Adefi, the scientists, are the bureaucrats, and then there are the vainglorious military angels. The what is that host called?
Yeah, Seraphim.
Thank you, Bill. So it's kind of like the military-industrial complex there. So they're all just cogs in this malfunctioning political machine that's lost its operator, God, and they're depicted as all too human here. And it sort of reminds one of the depiction of the Greco-Roman gods in the latter days of Roman theater. They were played largely for comedy. Spoofed pretty mercilessly. So that's sort of the fate of religion in its dying throes, and that seems to be what Ennis believes of the Judeo-Christian mythology of heaven, and that's what he's showing us in this first issue, and what he'll continue to show us as the series wears on. And I do echo Brian's sentiment about the effectiveness of this first issue in general, just introducing all the important players, succinctly and tantalizingly. And kudos, I think, needs to be given to Stuart Moore, the editor, for signing off on allowing this first issue being double-sized, so that Ennis has all the space he needs to tell us all of this and hook us all in so well. One of probably my favorite image from the entire first arc the 12 issues we're discussing here happens on in my trade. It's page 32. It's when Genesis shows up at Jesse's church, bursts through the wall and possesses him. It just comes streaming right at him, looking like this fireball made out of molten rainbows with a screaming baby head in the middle of it, and it's just coming straight at Jesse's face.
And what I like about, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That final panel where Jesse's up in the air reminds me, as almost an homage, if you will, to the Superman #1 cover.
Right, from 1939.
Yeah.
Good point, Pants.
Yeah, that is a good call. Yeah, and for whatever reason, that image is much more striking and memorable to me than the full-page splash on page 34 of Jesse with the image of a hybrid angel-demon behind him. It's I don't know whether it's just the rainbow fireball image is just less generically expected, a little less hackneyed. It doesn't rely so much on the classical depictions of angels and or demons. It's or maybe it's just Matt Hollingsworth's colors. Those it's like somebody threw up a paint set and it has a baby's head in the middle of it. It's just it's very memorable. It's the runner-up would probably be Grandma Marie going off like a firecracker close to the end of this arc. But that moment
that was immensely satisfying.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it is.
So, and as Chris said, we get to meet Tulip, and we get to meet Cassidy, and we get to meet the Saint of Killers, and then there's Sheriff Hugo Root, and as Chris said, he is the archetypal redneck hometown sheriff, only more so. Ennis really intensifies that stock character exponentially, and he's the first of. I mentioned earlier on that one of the things Ennis is doing is reconsidering depictions of masculinity, ideas and ideals of masculinity in American culture, and not all of them complementary. And Hugo Root, I think, is the first major example of that. He's just so surly and sullen and xenophobic and closed off. One of the things we learned in Bowling Green. I took a class on women in action genres, so we learned a lot about the depiction of genders and gender roles in action-adventure narratives in film and elsewhere. And one of the archetypal traits of action heroes is that they're grim and stern and closed off, and they don't let much emotion in or out. And Hugo Root is that taken to pathological extremes. And, of course, his impenetrable veneer of masculinity is very graphically penetrated by the end of his arc of the story. It's kind of an ironic extrapolation of his xenophobia. He wants as little to do with things and people that are not like him as possible, with his worrying about Martian niggers and so forth. But in the end, his fear of that which is different from him leads to him being penetrated by himself. The end.
I'm so glad Mert addressed that.
You're welcome, Chris.
Magnificent.
This is a book that pulls no punches when it comes to racial sensitivity or sensitivity of any kind, really.
True that.
But it is a book that makes sure that everybody who's on the wrong side of those issues typically gets their comeuppance.
That's right. Morality tales, as Chris said.
Yeah, exactly. It never lands on the side of anyone who is racist or misogynist or any other undesirable quality.
I thought the final page of the first issue, when you see the Saint of Killers revealing, his holstered 6-shooter, which of course never runs out of ammunition, and then Jesse Custer just goes bang. What a great way to end that first issue, and really, I can only imagine, because I didn't read the first few issues as they came out monthly. I can only imagine the anticipation for readers for the second issue to see what was going to happen with this entity. Anyway, you mind if we move on to number issue 2? Or maybe other comments about issue 1?
It's also one of the more, I think, sought after back issues of the last 20 or so years.
Okay, good thing, because I did actually buy a copy of the first issue at a a flea market for a dollar or two.
Wow, really?
Yeah, well, this is years ago, but I hadn't. It was the first issue of. I hadn't even bought my trade yet, but I thought, okay, I'll buy this and try it. I heard there's armadillo buggering involved. This is just too over the top for me. Of course, that doesn't happen until much later, but
much later.
But yeah, so I'm glad monetarily at least that I picked up that first issue.
Well, you ought to find it and let me see it.
I don't remember. I don't have the oversteer in front of me. I want to say it goes for at least $50.
Is that right?
Might go upwards of 100 or 200 depending on the condition. But anyway.
I'm not going to let you see it, Brian.
I'll wear my gloves.
We had a customer who had put together an entire run of the original series in issues, and that was amazing. He was telling me the letters pages were. Oh,
the letters pages are fabulous.
Oh, that's one thing I'm so sorry that I'm not seeing in these collections. That must be incredible to read.
Me too.
Well, there's none in your first issue. I say, pull it out, Merv. We'll take a look at your letters columns.
Any Ennis helmed letters page is always a treat. Hitman was the same way. Now, when I look at issue 2, and you go to that splash page of the Saint of Killers opening fire, and the title "And Hell" followed with him, I hear Johnny Cash's voice reciting that line in the song "The Man Comes Around" in that gravelly tone. And granted, that song came out after this comic, but wow, I mean, you talk about violence that is thrilling and terrifying all at the same time as you read this. And because you don't have a lot of sympathy for the sheriff and his underlings, but at the same time, like when the one deputy's dying because his intestines are hanging out and the other guys tell him just to kind of be quiet as you die, and you feel their terror and their panic because they obviously have no sense of what the hell are we dealing with here. And, why can't we stop this guy, essentially? Now, we have to remember later on the Saint of Killers will, of course, be destroying tanks with his pistols. So, this is obviously a supernatural being, but I think these opening scenes are compelling because even though a lot of these deputies, they're not like people you feel a lot of like you're rooting for them, you feel their helplessness and their panic as they're just slaughtered like sheep, essentially. And and again, we mentioned this earlier, I don't think anyone captivates the moment of death in all its absurdity the way Steve Dillon does. Violent death like this. I mean, noses flying apart, teeth being punched out, people being shot in the face, blood spurting. I mean, it's very much in keeping with the ultra-violence of that time we were discussing earlier, but I think it works. And it's when he comes walking out of the flames and Jesse says, "Tulip, get in the truck now." Oh. It's cinematic. I mean, I think we have also to mention what a great storyteller Steve Dillon is. How he orchestrates this carnage essentially in the sequence. Now, Billy, I mean, as an artist of skill yourself, what do you think of the way he does this scene?
Oh well, Steve Dillon's storytelling in the whole thing is just masterful. I just going down to the texture of the panels, which remains consistent throughout the book. It's one of the things that really lends itself visually to this book itself. I've never quite seen anything like it in any other comic.
Well, yeah, you just said that, and I'm looking through the rest of these things, and the panels all have that just slightly wavy border, and I never even noticed that till you mentioned that.
They're all jagged as hell.
Yes!
This is a book that is literally rough around the edges.
You just... Oh,
Great quote by Billy.
There you go. Put that in the liner notes.
Tucked away.
This is such a great opening scene for the Saint of Killers. I mean, he ended on that last issue on a great Clint Eastwood quote.
Yes.
But you don't look like the man who's going to take him. He's my favorite character out of this book. He's just this specter of death that haunts the entire story. A specter of violent, unstoppable death.
And Bill made a good point when he referenced Clint Eastwood because, again, one of those Western archetypes Ennis is applying here, like the unstoppable gunfighter that Eastwood often personified in his films. And he takes it here to this supernatural and terrifying level. It's like when the Old West in its reality, and you see this in the show Deadwood, was dirty, ugly, coarse, violent, and the Saint of Killers he encapsulates all of that. Like, take out the supernatural, that's the West right there in that character. That's what the West really was. It wasn't, Roy Rogers singing on a horse, and white men pretend to be Indians in films. Like, this is the West, and it's powerful.
That could be what the Saint of Killers is representing, where you have, the ghost of John Wayne helping Jesse, that vision of the honorable West handed down from movies and tales. And then here is his polar opposite, the specter of the murderous West, the one of the darkest times in American history, definitely. Just a violent and unpleasant place to be. It just manifests itself in the story of the Saint of Killers, which you get to read about later on in the series.
Mm-hmm. Billy, well put. And we have to remember that if you look at American history throughout, but especially in this period, let's not pull any punches. The United States and its culture is a history of violence and war. It's one of the most warlike cultures in human existence, in human history. And many other countries can attest to that, I can assure you. So it's... God, I'm glad Billy's here. Masterful. What do we think? Go ahead. What do we think about the use of Kurt Cobain's fate? When we get to the sheriff discussing, I think it's with the FBI agent. I love their dialogue, by the way. What do we think of that application? Because Cobain had just died, I think maybe a year before this book came out. Maybe it was even sooner. I don't remember. He was 94, 95. He took his own life.
93. Was
it 93? Okay, I apologize.
That long ago. Could have been 9. I was 13, so it could have been 93, 94.
April 5th, 1994.
Okay.
I thought it was a little bit later.
So I would have been 13.
Well, this is this book is the American dream, in as many varied facets as it can present. And I think the use of Kurt Cobain is to Arseface, introduced in this issue. Poor fucking Arseface. Kurt Cobain is to him what John Wayne is to Jesse Custer.
Well put.
This vision of the American dream personified. Unfortunately for Arseface, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever you'd use, he lived through his ordeal to carry on as this farcical character. One of the strangest characters, not just in this book, but because that's a freaking list.
Now, I'm sorry, Bill, go ahead.
In comics entirely, Arseface stands alone.
Well, and to add to that, I think this is one of the greatest transitional introductions art-wise of a character ever in the history of the American comic book. When the sheriff shows the FBI agent the photograph, and then you turn the page. I mean, that is such a seamless transition, and you're horrified and laughing all at the same time because the fact that they're translating for you what he's saying, because he suffered this horrific self-inflicted wound, and again, to me, this is just. It's such good writing because it's so absurd and over the top, and it's such pathos at the same time because this kid's trying not to have a relationship with his father he probably never had before he tried to take his own life. So you're very cognizant of the kid's trying. At the same time, like, you're laughing because you're reading this dialogue like you're watching a foreign movie, and like, what do you guys? I mean, like, Bill's given his thoughts. Like, Murd, first time you've seen this, what did you think of Arseface as a character?
Well, again, Wizard kind of spoiled that for me some 20 years ago. So I knew about Arseface. I knew his origin in the broad strokes. He was trying to emulate his hero, Kurt Cobain, and botched a suicide attempt and ended up with a puckered ruin of a face. And you're right, Chris. There is a definite pathos inherent in his trying so hard, like eager little puppy dog. This kid who used to be a rebellious teenager is now reduced to practically begging his father to pay attention to him. And old Hugo Root remains as closed off and stoic as ever. Yes, and going to the scene between his superior and the FBI agent, he reveals that Hugo Root's the range of his parenting skills goes from beatings to cigarette burns. So that gives you an idea of the kind of home life that Eugene, a.k.a. Arseface, had even before all of this happened. But reading through it now, I mean, it's... Oh, and just as a side note, I don't know what this says about me, but I was able to decipher about 60% of Arseface's dialogue, even without the given translation.
What? I don't know what this is about you. I didn't even bother with that.
Yeah, just follow the cadence and the consonant sounds, and you can...
Nobody does cadence quite like Garth Ennis. He is for everything else, an utterly a master of that. He nails song lyrics. He nails, like, the noises that you make when you're just kind of bum, bum, bum. Like, he would capture that perfectly in a word balloon. It's a tremendous skill.
Agreed.
Well put, Billy.
And while we're talking about song lyrics, let's also give a shout-out to Willie Nelson, who gets quoted at the beginning of the first issue, and who is heard at the beginning of the first episode of the Preacher TV show.
Oh, wow.
Don't think
nailed the soundtrack.
I'm looking forward. I haven't seen it again. I'm looking forward to watching it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you will hear it of Willie Nelson.
I love Willie Nelson.
All right, now getting back to Arseface, I'm going to name drop Bowling Green again. Something else that I learned in one of the couple of pop music classes I took while I was there about Kurt Cobain was that he and musicians of his generation, kind of the whole grunge movement, represented a new recodification of masculinity for the mid-1990s. It was representative of a more sensitive, artistic American manhood, because the 90s was kind of the rise of the sensitive male in reaction to the strong, silent type of decades past. And Kurt Cobain, his particular brand of masculinity was, similar to Jesse Custer, as educated by John Wayne and by his father. Cobain had a certain code of honor that he followed, and he just hated the idea of his music. The truth-telling that he was accomplishing with his music was being corrupted and commodified by, big industry. And as a result of that, out of this sense of honor, he took a gun to his face. And Arseface, stumbling awkwardly along in his idol's footsteps, attempts to do the same thing, and all he gets is horribly disfigured and an even worse life than he'd had before. So see this as Ennis's commentary, perhaps, on what he thinks of this sensitive, Seattle-derived mid-'90s masculinity. And I don't think Ennis is pretty particular as to which strains of masculine ideology he respects, and I'm not at all convinced that he thinks that highly of Cobain, just based on how he treats poor Arseface here. So just to look at the contrast between Arseface and his father, I mean, neither one of them is what Ennis seems to be telling us is a respectable mode of masculinity, but in the end, Arseface is the one who ends up with his own dick up his ass. Think of it that way.
Now, that reminds me, there's several times in this story where there's homoerotic humor or references to homosexuality that I'm interested in people's opinion that if they use that today, do you think it would be how do you think it would be not accepted is the right word? How would people think would react to an audience would react to that today? For example, later on in the story, John Wayne refers the myth of John Wayne that is personified in front of Custer refers to him as a faggot because he's not sort of standing up for himself. How do people react to that as they were reading it in 2016?
My reaction was simply that John Wayne is not as right and as trustworthy as he might be on the surface. And does Jesse, I mean, I've never, obviously I haven't read past the second trade. Does Jesse ever come to a similar conclusion? Is there ever a parting of the ways between the two of them?
Without spoiling too much, they do eventually part, but not in the metaphorical sense. They never tend to disagree. John Wayne's mostly just a guiding angel, for the most part, for him.
Yep. Beyond that, I just said, okay, you've already said it, Chris. The man himself was not as respectable as some of the heroic roles he played in film, so I just kind of shrugged and said, yeah. He's a ghost. He's of another time.
Exactly. And I just found it interesting because, someone like that, the Wayne personification is very much of another time, and it's an idealized time at that. And I just found it interesting because it, again, just times change in terms of what's being written, how people express themselves. I mean, like when you look at issue 2, when Jesse and Cassidy get in their first of many brawls that they have with roustabouts throughout the series. And, he's talking about how he's calling one guy essentially a homo, and the guy reacts very negatively. Then, of course, he sticks his fingers up his nostrils and beats him to a pulp.
Yeah.
And this, of course, we also see Cassidy revealed, his true nature is revealed for the first time.
Yeah, that's the end of issue 2 cliffhanger.
Yes. What was our reaction to that? The knife protruding from his glasses and the...
Well, if you were paying attention to the first, then you already knew something was a little bit off.
Right.
Because as he's making his escape with Tulip, he gets shot in the side of the head.
Yeah.
Tulip goes, I didn't even know you got hit. And he lies and says, it grazed me.
I also enjoyed when they show Cassidy mauling the guy's neck at the splash page at the end of issue 2. Definitely a different take on the vampire sort of mystique. Like, this is not like, the central, kind of leaning the woman's neck back, and she's in ecstasy as he punctures her. I'm like, he's just tearing his neck apart.
Right. No.
And just making a meal out of it, essentially. So
it's not a clean surgical procedure. He's ripping your effing neck tendons out. So yeah, even though I knew, again, Wizard spoiling this for me, Cassidy is in fact a vampire, I wasn't expecting him to feed in quite that graphic a way, so that was something of a surprise. Looking closely, he doesn't even really have fangs.
No, actually, they say later in the book he doesn't have fangs. At all.
Yeah. One thing I've been wanting to get my hands on for years is the Cassidy Blood and Whiskey one-shot, which directly contrasts Cassidy as vampire to the Cult of Anne Rice that was kind of semi-prevalent in the 90s.
It sure does.
You get that in it's just included in the normal stuff now. So you'll actually get that in volume 5, I think.
Yeah, Bill's right, all the one-shots are interspersed throughout the various collections.
Yep. Is the Saint of Killers miniseries in there?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They actually do. Yeah. So they have the Arseface mini, the Jody and TC story, and the story of the Saint of Killers all in, well, it was volume 4. I'm guessing probably book 2 now. So, yeah, those are, I don't even know why they did them as side stories, because they tend to be pretty integral to what's going on in the main series. Yeah, I don't even know why they were put separate in the first place, except maybe to give Steve Dillon a break on art, and just to maintain, I guess, a rigorous publication schedule. And
then later on, you get the origin of Star, which is just tremendous. What do we haven't talked much about Tulip yet. Now, what do we think of as her characters developed in these opening issues? Because she's one of my favorite characters in the whole series, actually. What do people think of her and the way her character is introduced in these opening issues? And her dynamic with Jesse.
Personally, I think that Garth Ennis didn't know who he had on his hands at first, because her introduction in the book is very unceremonious. We find out that she came to be there because she botched a hit. The Tulip that we come to know over the course of the book, I don't think would have botched that hit.
That's a good point.
So
she is quite adept with a pistol, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that Garth Ennis knew exactly where she was going, but once he realizes, who he's got on his hands, who Tulip O'Hare really is, then you start to see some really fun stuff. She doesn't take anything from anybody, and is a total badass character.
Do we eventually see some glimpses of her early life, before she ever met Jesse Custer?
Oh yeah.
All right. Very good.
There's actually that's a really, really moving story, and it moves along very fast.
Yep, her and her father.
Yeah.
Okay, good, because we do learn from this first trade that's where she got her marksmanship, where she learned to shoot.
Yep.
But yeah, just reading directly from my notes about Tulip here, she comes across as a strong, self-reliant, believable character, but lacks a bit in definition. And, of course, that is just referring to her appearance in the first 12 issues. And I was also hoping, and you've fulfilled that hope for me, Bill, that eventually we'll get to see a little more of her background and just fill in some gaps in her character without just defining her strictly in terms of her relationship with Jesse, her history with Jesse. And I do think that her interactions with and attitude towards Jesse, for better or worse, are believable here. But I was hoping that there'd be a little more to the character than that. But yeah, I do like what we have on paper so far. And this is the last thing I'm going to say about Preacher, the series. I do think that one of the things that the pilot did as a disservice to the comics. I think the Tulip of the comics is much better than what we got in the TV show.
Oh, I completely disagree. I was in love with the pilot Tulip, where first 12 issues of Tulip, she's very weak. She's defined by Jesse. She's not her own woman.
I do agree with you there.
She's just there as a love interest. Like what Bill said, it's been so long since I've read it, so I don't really remember what happens, but rereading it, I think some of my problems was the fact that it's, like, you guys keep talking about masculinity. There's nothing here for me. And I think that's part of the problem. Like, Tulip, she's very weak in this. She's just there for Jesse. She's just a love interest. And, like, the whole time that him and Cassidy are joking, oh, I'm going to have sex with her. Like, Jesse's coming off as a douchebag saying, oh, I give it 3 days and I'm in bed with her. Like, it was almost like that was his goal, even though he's like, why are you sticking around? You're only sticking around because you want to have sex with me, because you still love me. And it's like, but at the same time, this crazy thing happened and you have the word of God. There's probably, I mean, I'm sure she still has feelings for him, but of course she's going to stick around because this is craziness that's going on. And she's got, she can't really go back to where she was because, you know, she owes a lot of money to a hitman and stuff. So, or the whatever that guy is. So, I mean, to me, she's really a blank slate at this point. She doesn't really do much for me. And I didn't actually enjoy it was very guy talk. Like, I'm going to bone her. Like, you know, it's just kind of like, I don't know. It bothered me.
I have to agree with Danny. I really, really liked that. The Tulip on the screen, made a splash and made an awesome character that was, I think, more worthy of that introduction. Tulip is worthy of that introduction, and I think
because that's what she turns into.
Exactly. That's what she becomes more closely to the end of the book.
I am glad to hear that.
And because I think when you do read her backstory, Murd, you'll find the same thing, that knowing the Tulip we come to know deserves a much more satisfying opening splash, entrance, and the TV show delivers where the comic pales a little bit.
Yeah, because I think introducing her as an inept hitman doesn't do her any justice. You're like, oh, look, weak character.
No, and it won't make sense in light of her backstory, frankly. So I think the introduction is far weaker than the backstory.
Well, I do look forward to reading the backstory. You know, and if I weren't concerned about spoiling the members of the discussion who haven't seen the pilot yet, I'd engage a little further as to what it is I didn't like about TV Tulip.
Yeah,
but
stick to the book.
We'll leave it on the table.
We'll have to talk about that.
That will be for a future discussion. But.
Indeed. All right. Do we have other comments about this first arc that Sheriff Root and the confrontation with the Saint of Killers? Anything else that people want to touch upon in this first sort of arc within this volume?
Well, just towards the end, I love how you have the hints of what's to come. It's like looking back, because I've read the whole book now. Looking back, reading this stuff again, it's like, oh wow, it's a lot of the stuff's just right here in this first arc, and that last image of the first arc with that, if he's looking around and have the credits standing tall. That's just an amazing splash page. And I turn around and throw it right back.
Yeah, that is a great page. I was also amused by when the angel appears. This is on page 116 in the book one that I have in front of me. Then behold, O mortals, the glory of the heavenly host. And he just says, cut the shit, will you? And then he appears as one of these Adelphi sort of bureaucrat angels. And you see Jesse, using the word of God, of course, to extract information. And they kind of go into, what was the, no pun intended, the genesis of all this. So I found that very interesting. What did we think of what happens to Root and Arseface at the end.
Are we on?
Gratuitous humor, pathos, both. What? I mean...
Well, yeah, as I said, the end that Root comes to is kind of a perfect, graphic, ironic extrapolation of the xenophobia he's exhibited all along. As far as Arseface goes, he seems to be starting off on a heroic journey of his own, and at this point, I can't even begin to visualize what shape that might take.
Relatively arse-shaped murder. Arse-shaped.
All right. Puckering up for that.
he gets his own sort of coming of age story that takes some strange turns along the way.
Do we get to see what he was like before the incident?
You do. That's what his side story was. His miniseries story is him sort of telling his backstory Forrest Gump style.
Is it telling it aloud? So do we need the translation captions, or is it an internal monologue?
It starts the one, and then it goes to the actual history, and you're experiencing it as though you were there. You go to flashback. So you don't have to read tons and tons of Arseface gargling. Yeah, exactly. Sheriff Root, the funny thing about Sheriff Root, like, I don't think he definitely, I don't know, I don't want to say he got what he deserved, and it definitely comes out that Jesse didn't intend it that way.
Right, yeah.
This is a recurring theme, then, that the Word of God is more literally interpreted by those under its spell.
God, yes.
That it has consequences.
I'm thinking of pebbles of sand on a beach, Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more like that it has consequences. That is a very powerful weapon. It's the most powerful weapon. He can simply command people to do what he wants, and he does some philosophizing on that point. When should he use that power versus mete out some more earthly justice?
I was going to say, if we want to move into the next arc, which taps another favorite 90s trope it's often, which is the serial killer.
It's a Vertigo favorite subject.
Yes, it sure is.
I wonder if he made it out to the cereal convention.
Well done, Billy. Well done. What I really liked in this part of the story, first of all, the scenes where the three main characters, are talking and kind of circling each other conversationally, and you really appreciate the growing bond between Jesse and Cassidy. It's juvenile in some ways, and of course you don't. Again, a perceptive reader might notice that Cassidy, we don't have a good grasp of who he really is, essentially yet. But like we've kind of said, there's a lot of male bonding in this book. Daniel's shaking her head vigorously at this point. And, and some of it is playful and good humored. Some of it is very stereotypical. Some of it is deceptive and creepy, in a way. And like, for example, in this story, you have the most hapless police officer in the Vertigo universe, which is Detective Toole, with Paulie Bridges, who was referred to as Super Cop in his first appearance.
This is not too different from Detective John Soap of
the Punisher.
His Punisher books. John Soap, the hapless task force of one charged with bringing down the Punisher in New York City.
Yep, definitely saw the parallels there too, Bill.
What did we think of Cassidy's pal? What was his name again? The journalist.
Mm-hmm. Cy Coltrane.
Cy the space cadet.
Yeah.
Creepy.
I liked him till,
Creepy.
till he starts murdering people.
Mm-hmm.
So, Danny, what do you think of him again, Danny?
I think it's a little creepy.
Okay. I wasn't sure we conveyed
creepy
that.
From the beginning, or creepy after murdering people?
Yes.
No, I don't remember because I couldn't remember if he was a serial killer or the cop was a serial killer. But even just like the panel on page 136 in the trade, he just looks so creepy at the bottom corner.
He does have kind of a shit-eating grin.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I mean, Dillon just draws the creepiest ugly as characters, but like ugly in a good way.
Right.
Artfully ugly.
Yeah.
Well put. Well put. Well put. I also enjoy how you start to get. You're intrigued by, like, all right, how old is Cassidy? Like, you really want to know as they just go into, like Bill said, every character they introduce gets, like, his quick side story that, like, they immerse you into every character, even if it's just briefly. And as Cy talks about his experiences with Cassidy, you really want to learn, like, all right, how old is Cassidy? What in history has he seen? And they really, kind of, at least for me, they really hooked me on. I want to learn a lot more about this character. Obviously, he's Irish, but, how old is he? What has he experienced? He was at Woodstock, for example. So that really hooked me on the Cassidy character. And Bill, based on what you said, I can't wait to see how he's portrayed in the television show.
Knowing his cadence and his demeanor as an actor, I started reading Cassidy in his voice and was not let down when we saw the TV show.
Oh, wow. Another thing I liked about this issue, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts on it, throughout Preacher, Ennis always, again, with the same thing with the Old West, he addresses American archetypes and, like, the myth of America, which, perhaps foreigners learn through American movies and so forth with the reality. And when Jesse goes, because he's never been to New York City before, so he goes to different sites. Then he goes to the Empire State Building, and he climbs he goes to the top, and just what do people think of just what Ennis is doing here with just the notion of America, which is a theme throughout the whole series, and what America means, myth versus the reality, essentially. Because he's writing, he's an Irishman, so he's writing. No, he obviously lives in the United States now, but he's writing in a sense as someone who's visiting this country. What do people think about that?
Well, it seems like he's making the grand tour as a writer, just moving his characters from spot to spot in this nation and taking a few pages in each little arc to stop and have the characters or reflect upon, so that he can reflect upon these things through them. The mythoi that develop around specific locations, like the local. Mythic images that develop around them. So we've talked about the Old West at length, and I'm sure that's the largest and most thoroughly explored regional mythos that he gets into in this series. But here, I'm glad you brought it up, Chris, on page 147 in my trade. Just Cassidy and Jesse standing on top of the Empire State Building, looking out at the still standing Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, and Jesse musing to himself, since he's no less an outsider to New York City than Garth Ennis himself would have been, about how from that vantage, every movie, like every popular myth he'd ever consumed about this place, seemed as if it could have been true. A kind of continuity happening down there amongst all those, way down in all that smoky streetlight is the exact expression he uses. And Ennis goes on to do the same thing for a couple of other regions that these characters will be visiting in the next couple of issues. They head far down south to Angelville and out to San Francisco, and every step along the way, Ennis seems to have a couple of things to say about the popular, in many cases fictionalized conceptions that exist about these places.
Yep. They head out
also, I'm sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Valley at one point. They head to New Orleans at one point.
Alamo.
Oh, yes.
Also, in that same page, where it's actually we find out how old Cassidy is, he says, "I'm the same age as the century." So.
Yeah.
And boy, do they do a lot with that in subsequent issues too. So, Murd, I envy the journey.
It's a heck of a ride so far, Chris.
Yes, Cassidy's such a strange character because you want to equate him like right away to this sort of classic, like straight out of the songs Irish rover. Mrs. Cassidy's son, he isn't working. But I also wonder if he represents because of the places that he's seen, and he drops these little hints about who he associated with too, like. Bill Burroughs and stuff like that. If he doesn't also represent this sort of drug-filled psychedelic haze that possibly infused some sort of...
He's like the counterculture vampire, essentially.
He is. Yeah, counterculture vampire is kind of the perfect way to put it. This part of counterculture that, to complete the metaphor, sort of preys on people and drains them dry.
Well put, Billy. God, I'm glad he's here. What was our take on... Because this is kind of another trope, the self-hating gay man, so the police officer, Bridges. How do we react to him?
This is just another, I think, element of
It's a product of its time.
It's a product of its time, and it's also another example of Garth Ennis's very, very rough take, I guess, on basically any topic which somebody might want to, say, pull back and look at more sensitively. This might have been a reaction to, PC growing as a thing, too.
And PC was a big part of our culture at the time.
Yeah, and it's still, that sort of, those sort of anti-PC feelings, they're rife in this country right now still. So this is something that I think as a people we haven't gotten over. Garth Ennis pulls no punch about any sort of identity politics, but he always comes down on the people should be allowed to do what they want to do as long as nobody's getting hurt. Yep. Paul Bridges is just another example of the sort of demented masculine philosophy that punishes itself for doing something it wants to do, even though, while that thing is, out of the scope of what masculinity is for him, And
Bill's raised a good point, because lest we forget, political correctness as a term and as a movement, I don't know if it's really an organized movement, but it was saturated our popular culture, certainly in the mid-1990s. That term was everywhere. And certainly a lot of films and books and so forth and comics, I think, as Bill said, were sort of responding to that, and sometimes in a subversive manner, or they were like reacting to it and sort of pushing back. Because I remember at the time, there were debates about, is political correctness stifling free speech? Is political correctness, suffocating? Is it going too far? Is it a dilution? You had these conversations that were going on, in different forms of media. So I think Bill's made a good point that you see that here in its own way and in this book, essentially.
Yeah, Preacher's heart is usually in the right place. It just
Absolutely.
does not. It does not weaken its language at all for anyone. So if it's the words that are going to upset you, then they're going to upset you. But the message is definitely something I think that one should take away from it.
Did we know right away he was the serial killer?
No, they strung us on for a little bit.
Yeah. What'd you think, Bert?
I did not pick up on the fact that Cy was the killer until fairly late on. And I agree with Bill that I found him fairly likable, as Ennis meant us to, until right about the part he drove that dagger through Tulip's hand.
Yeah, what a scene.
And, I appreciate Ennis's take on Cy's motivations for doing what he does. It's simply that it was fun, and that he kind of got hooked on trying to push his little game further and further to see how much more outrageous, horrible, bloody things he can get away with. That strikes me as kind of it's a fairly, well, to a point, it's a plausible motivation for someone to do the kind of things that he's been doing. Maybe not in and of itself. There might be something else going on psychologically beyond that. Not that the character is going to tell us that, but yes, it ties into one of the things that you said earlier about the ethos of Preacher, so the code of honor that Jesse comes to exemplify of honesty and responsibility and forthrightness. And Ennis, stepping back a bit metatextually, I think he's doing his part not only to explore certain myths, e.g. the myths of the Old West and of New York City and so forth that we were talking about just a little while ago, but also to explode certain other myths, many of them related to organized religion, say. And one of the things he's doing here, I think, in revealing that Cy became a serial killer just because it was fun, was an attempt to cut through some of the BS surrounding serial killer narratives in Vertigo comics and elsewhere, and just having this right bastard, decide that he was going to kill people because he accidentally discovered he enjoyed it. Now, when we get to the point where we learn that he's not only willing to kill his old friend Cassidy and Tulip and Jesse into the bargain, and he also apparently at some point killed his parents and put them in the freezer at their own apartment, that's when I think it goes just maybe a tiny step too far. And maybe at that point we need a little bit more to explain why this character's motives than just it was fun. But I still appreciate Ennis trying to be a little more surprisingly straightforward about his doping out of the motives of this character. And you have to enjoy the way he ended up dying.
Oh, absolutely.
Jesse using that word in a way he has not to date attempted.
Well, and this is in that scene. I mean, you really. I mean, I agree with Danielle. I love the Tulip character, but the Tulip character we know really is developed further as the series progresses. I'm really looking forward to seeing how she's portrayed in the show based on what you've just described. But you certainly you see there, obviously that Jesse, for all some of his macho posturing about, I have a boner that can knock down a door and so forth, that he's obviously still very much in love with this girl. And obviously when we get to the Angelville story, we can appreciate, the horrifying circumstances of why he actually left her. But I thought those were powerful scenes. And again, Cassidy is so endearing. When they have him in the morgue and he sits up and asks, the morgue worker for the light. I mean, that's just classic Ennis humor and it's so emblematic of that character. And it makes you like Cassidy so much. And as Ennis develops him and he becomes a more complicated character, you really appreciate at these early stages why he's portraying Cassidy the way he is. And it really sucks you in, and you like the guy so much. So it's a great little moment. So
he's the life of the party.
Yes.
Is who he's supposed to be, I think.
My take on Cassidy is that he exists, he may feed on blood, but he exists in this story to suck the pretentiousness and conventionality out of it. He's there to, keep things honest, so to speak. And he's a familiar voice, an Irish voice, if you will, for Ennis to write and think through. But he also helps to keep things starkly and frighteningly real. Whenever Ennis gets to the smell of his own shite too much, as it were.
He does that too, but he's also full of his own self quite a lot, Cassidy. In many ways, he's also there to, I think, illustrate how off so many of these myths are from reality. Mm-hmm. That he's a walking exemplar of not, the real thing not living up to the legend. And you'll read more about that, of course, in later installments.
Blood and whiskey.
Well, as we move on to Angelville, right, Bill?
Yeah, Angelville.
Yeah. I have to leave out 15 minutes. If you don't mind, I'm going to leave with some comments on this arc. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, go ahead.
By all means.
This is my favorite part of this first book. This story. For a couple reasons. One, I find Jody one of the most terrifying villains ever portrayed in a comic book. Because in so many ways you can, taking out the supernatural aspects, because the word doesn't work on him and so forth, you can imagine someone like him existing. And he's frightening. Because even though he's very much coming from a community of pure white trash, there's a sinister intelligence to him. He's not just some mindless cretin who, there's something that I think Jesse even acknowledges that in the story, actually, that this guy is very sharp and deadly in his own way. But what I really loved in this arc was the love story between Jesse's parents. Because, and again, this is where Ennis shows his understanding and his application of history. The Marine comes from Vietnam. He has this, and this didn't happen as much as I think our popular media portrays, but it did happen, where he's spat upon by the erstwhile hippie and called the baby killer, and then Ennis just punctures all that, and they kind of end up in each other's arms. They had this moment of clarity between them when they both realized what are we doing here? And you really you really love. I mean, personally, I really love the brief relationship he develops with his parents. Like they show that his parents have, and it makes it all the more poignant when that relationship is torn asunder by Jesse's mother's past, her family, so to speak. Just quickly, what did people think of Jody as a character?
Oh, he's frightening as anything. You nailed it. He is the original. He's just psychopath. He's sadistic. He lives to hurt any living thing in as creative a way as possible, and I don't know. I guess ride horses and smoke weed and all that other stuff too. But he's just a pure bona fide bastard.
And yet, in his own way, he no less lives by his own moral code than Jesse does. Yeah, and after Jesse is done beating him to death, his last words are "proud of you."
Proud of you, boy. Yep, because he finally stood up to him and beat him. And like you said, Murder, and again, I'm skipping it because I have to leave soon. I apologize, but when in that climactic battle, when Jesse says, "I'm not going to make you drop the gun. I'm going to fight you." I mean, and you see how proud Jody is of him. Like that's like his son, like he's raised like to be this man essentially by putting him in. Like when you think about what they did with the coffin, I mean, it's to me that this story is where you really understand who Jesse Custer is because it's his origin. Like this is where he came from, essentially, and you appreciate all the more what kind of man he is because, I mean, granted, this is in many ways over the top. I mean, the grandmother is just, it's. Talk about Pulp Fiction, but
she has to be 110.
Yeah, and she had like a kid when she was 50 or something like that. But so there's a supernatural element to her, and they have her talking to, is it God? Is it an angel? She's communing with somebody essentially in her bedchamber. You really appreciate. I'm sorry, Bill. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's pretty obvious. It's God, like right away. Yeah. Hallowed be thy name.
Yeah, and the fact that Custer comes out of this hellish upbringing, and you appreciate the fact that even though he's a product of this community, ultimately he's more a product of his parents and the love that they shared and the lessons that they taught him. And you really appreciate the strength of his character that he held on to that through this hellish existence he experienced. And when you look – and again, I have to go back to what a great artist Steve Dillon is. What's the name of his one-eyed incest friend?
Billy Bob.
Okay, when he goes to Billy Bob's house to tell his parents that his son is dead, and again, it's such a poignant moment because that was his only friend. But then Dillon shows you the expressions on this family as he enters the house.
Oh, yeah.
And how they're just such a product of incest, and it's hilarious. Yes. But it's also so sad at the same time because his only friend has had his throat slit by Jody's sidekick. Again, I mean, no one does these expressions better than Dillon. I mean,
Yeah, the expression on the face of Billy Bob's one-eyed sister, who is also his bride-to-be, as she wails, "Billy Bob!" Yeah, that stuck with me, Chris. So point well made there.
Yeah, and when they first introduced Billy Bob, and he's bare-chested with the pants kind of tucked up, he's got his hands in his pockets, and you see like he's just this sweet, simple kid. And then Grandma makes him sleep in the barn when he stays over, at the compound and so forth. And you really, I mean, I think this is great writing. This is part you really feel for this poor benighted kid, and what he's a product of, essentially. I just, for me, this is the heart of the series, this story, in many ways. Like just what made Jesse Custer. You really appreciate how he came out of this. And what kind of person he was. What did we think of when they show him as like a 17-year-old, as a teenager, and he's out and about, and he's like, got the cocksure personality. What did we think of his encounters with Tulip and how they meet each other? How do we react to that in the beginning of their relationship? Do we see it more as like romantic myth, or do you really feel it, or what?
Oh, they have they were made for each other, love at first sight sort of relationship. So yeah. It's definitely the myth of romance.
I love you to the end of the world.
Yeah, that they can meet in a bar somewhere and instantly go to Bonnie and Clyding it through America, just stealing cars and running from the law and screwing on the side of the road. Yeah, they're totally a myth.
So, and again, I'm skipping around because I have to leave, and I apologize again for that. But what did we feel? How did we feel, or what did we think, I should say, about the presentation of God in this story? Because he actually it appears as an anthropomorphic being speaking to first Grandma and then to Tulip. How do we react to how Ennis handled that?
Well, I was definitely surprised to see God show up
So early in the series, yeah.
So early in his, and you know what? I think at all, he says, "I'm going to go find God," and I don't think that that first read, I really put it together that God's in this comic. God's a character in this comic, and there he is, right there. I think Tulip cut right to the heart of the God character, which is that he's just full of his own self, and that's kind of the point of the character. That's kind of the crux of the book, is the dismissing of myth. It seems like.
What'd you think, Mert?
Well, Bill said it. It is about deconstruction of myths and preconceptions and long, dearly held tenets of religious faith. And God, as we see him here, just a couple of limited glimpses. We're told that at one point the quote special effects lapse, and Tulip is able to see him as just this little old man. And so God is being played here as kind of a tired, bitter, and fairly obviously frightened old has-been. There's something blowing in the wind that's got God worried, and that something is pretty obviously Genesis, the entity that's possessed Jesse and has given him the word of God. And so here God is trying desperately to hold on to what little power and prestige he still has in his own universe. He's reduced to bullying and hoodwinking his own minor human creations into towing the line. He's kind of a Frank Morgan-style Wizard of Oz humbug. And I do kind of look forward to the final confrontation between Jesse and God, when he finally gives God a piece of his mind. That I'm actually willing and happy to wait a long time to see that confrontation, because I want the build-up to be everything it can be.
Now, Pants, as an art lover, how about that page where John Wayne says, "Now let's see you walk the walk," and then Custer walks out striding, full of confidence and power, just saying, "You got it."
Yeah,
I mean, when you see that page, everybody's dying in the next issue. Like, no one is going to survive the wrath that's coming.
Yeah.
Like the cigarette, it's such American myth, and it just, right down to the black coat. It's, boy, would I love to own that page. Holy mackerel! It's just such a classic. Oh man! And again, I'm a eye for an eye type of guy. I really enjoyed seeing everybody get slaughtered in the last issue because they're all scum.
Yeah.
So, Grandma especially, fanatic that she is, so immensely satisfying. And I have to mention that I do have to leave, but when the last page where they're kissing and the flames are behind us until the end of the world, in my first shop, Danielle, remember this, in Boundbrook, my cousin who can replicate any image as an artist, she did a full window-sized mural of this image.
Oh.
And she wrote, until the end of the world underneath it, essentially. And that was in 1999. That was destroyed in a flood, unfortunately. Oh. But I love that image. I must apologize, my friends. I have to depart because I have parent duty to attend to. And sometimes it does feel like D-O-O-D-Y rather than D-U-T-Y. But,
that's parenting for you.
Yeah, I wish you all a wonderful evening. And I look forward to listening to the rest of this as you wrap it up.
All right.
And Billy, my friend, please join us anytime.
Oh, thank you. Well,
that was masterful analysis, brother. Masterful.
I want to come back for more of this, definitely.
Outstanding. All right, brothers. I will email you all soon and have a fine evening.
All right.
Happy trails, Bill.
Good night, sister, as well.
Night.
Farewell. Bye.
Yeah, there was in that last issue. There were points I was literally cheering, and it's very often you start reading a comic book, you start having these kind of visceral reactions. Like this, the build-up is like, yeah! It's like you said, it's like, oh, man.
This book is all is all viscera. Though.
Oh, my God.
You know, that's what it is. This is the payoff in a book like this.
Yes. Man, just what a great ending to a year's worth of stories. As it came out 12 issues, and like the collection here, just amazing.
Yeah, I'm really glad that they ended with this story in the new book structure,
right,
because that really makes more sense. Where this is like the ultimate sort of denouement of that first 3 story arc.
Yeah,
because then you get into Jesus Desaad, and that's a whole other barrel of weirdness. I'm glad we didn't have to do that this time. But, man, yeah, so I guess to follow up on what Chris was saying, you know, Murd, what did you think of some of these characters being a first-time person?
You mean from the Angelville arc?
Yes.
Grandma Marie is... she's a terrifying old relic. You know, she's representative of an imperialistic, early American colonialism at its worst, I guess you could say. Her family, the Langels, are said to have converted the local residents,
the local Indians to corpses,
right? Like the bayou dwelling Indians, because it was cheaper than Christianity. Right? So revealing that their piousness was really just a cheap veil for power hunger, which is a common criticism leveled at religion, and certainly not a punch that Ennis is going to pull among the many other punches he, as you've observed, Bill does not pull in this story. TC is an amusing little fucker. Yep, and we've covered Jody, just a monolithic sociopath that he is, but a sociopath rendered all the more frightening by the fact that his sociopathy is systematized. He has a code that he lives by and dies by in the end. So, yeah, it's a truly horrific extended family that Jesse has down there in Angelville, and this arc serves the purpose of not only bringing us a couple of steps closer to catching God and cornering him, but it also helps Jesse make a little bit of peace with his horrible past so that he can then move on with the quest on which Ennis has launched him.
Definitely lets him make peace with Tulip, too, at the end. I mean, you've gotten to the end of this one where it's like full-blown... full-blown, like, Django Unchained, them kissing in front of the burning building.
That plantation house, yeah.
Yeah, in just this amazingly epic culmination scene. The only other thing that I really wanted to bring up from this story is I think this is where Tulip starts to become Tulip, particularly after she's...
resurrected.
After she's resurrected, after she's shot in the head and resurrected. This is a female character who refused to be literally refused to be put in a fridge. Right here, that she was such a strong character that she's going to come back and have an argument with God about why he's kind of an ass and deserves Jesse's whooping. I don't know. What did you guys think of Tulip's murder, essentially, as part of this book?
I figured it probably wouldn't be permanent, but I didn't expect God to be the literal deus ex machina that got her out of that situation. What a twist!
Yeah. I'm glad that Garth didn't, obviously throw away such a great character so early on, and for such a a tropey thing.
Well, at the risk of reopening a closed chapter here, could I step back and say one thing about the New York sequence?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Sandwiched as it is between the Angelville arc and the original Gone to Texas arc, whatever you want to call it, it seemed to me a little superfluous in hindsight. It kind of reads like your basic plot digression, just kind of a little filler arc in between two more central arcs to the ongoing plot thread. In terms of the superstructure, the overall plot structure of the work as a whole, it probably wasn't necessary. Not to say that it wasn't a good, rollicking story, not to say that Ennis didn't get in a few good moments and make a few good points along the way, but we probably could have done without it. The reason I even go back and bother to say this is just to help to support a point that you made earlier, Bill. One of the first things you said, actually, about how great the characters are in this series. And it feels to me that during the New York story, Ennis was maybe just kind of killing a little bit of time to buy himself time to puzzle out what the direction of the series was going to be in future arcs. But I think at this point he had probably figured out from the response he'd gotten from readers that with these really cool characters and this premise that he set up for himself, he could take these characters just about anywhere and do just about anything, and plenty of people would be along for the ride and enjoying the hell out of it. So I think this is where we learn just where he kind of figured out that he had a hit on his hands. And it's about that time also that several people came to the conclusion that Preacher would probably make a decent open-ended TV series, which, as luck would have it, is what we have now in 2016 got.
Oh, yes. I'm really looking forward to more of that series. I definitely see what you're saying about the NYC story. It has a lot of fluff. It is just another rollicking tale in the drop of this bucket of rollicking tales. But to a certain extent, that is what Preacher fundamentally is, I think. Is this rollicking tale. So it doesn't take us too far out of the way. It gives us the sort of idea of the kind of people who Cassidy knows. And the kind of it's sort of the first in this line of actions that Cassidy's involvement in Jesse Custer's journey. It's the start of this pattern of behavior that Cassidy has, and New York becomes a very central location to the book. Like they always sort of bounce between New York and everywhere else they're going.
Okay, so we will see more of that city.
Yes, you will.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are we going to see more of those police detectives?
No, you won't.
Okay.
No, those are definitely a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like a mention later on in the book, and that's about it. They're not important characters, to say the least.
Okay.
They were definitely sort of the weird, like, one-off characters that you meet that are just sort of throwaway characters for Garth Ennis. But I mean, even them he used, again for this running masculinity. What are the defining qualities of masculinity in America in this time and place? And those were just two more examples of that, I think. As ridiculous as they were.
Yeah. Indeed. Yep. Ultra machismo taken to such an extent that it becomes masochism.
Yeah. And I guess, I don't know. Soap, was it Soap or was it...
Tool.
Tool.
Yep, Tool in this universe. Soap was the Punisher guy.
Some ridiculous 4-letter last name. Detective Tool is... I don't know who Detective Tool is. The bumbling nice guy? The nice guy who always finishes last? No idea. Just this almost like what is it called? Like a harlequinade. He's the butt of every joke. Yeah.
But there's a bit of a reversal of fortunes there, a destiny trade between him and his partner, and he ends up the hero cop. And
for a short while, yes. Then it's back to his old misfortunes. Unfortunately, I think
bad luck catches up with him. Yeah. So that is kind of a difficult character to read in terms of moral. But as the last line of that story goes, there are 10 million stories in the Naked City, and not all of them have morals.
Yep. Yeah. So that one just might have been Sound and Fury, like you were saying. But it definitely was Sound and Fury within the bounds of, I think, what Preacher was trying to be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it didn't advance the central plot of the quest for God, Danny, but it did at least, as you say, build up some of the characters and their connections and just help further establish the graphic, grisly tone that Ennis is going to be using for the whole series.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that's everything I wanted to say. Do you want to say anything?
I've got nothing.
Got nothing? You guys?
No, I'm good.
We are similarly spent, I think.
All right.
Want to take some frickin' swear ratings, though?
Oh,
sure.
Sure. I mean, 4.5 out of 5 just the dip with the New York.
Maybe 4.25 for me.
Yeah, I was going to stick with the 4 and I don't want to seem like the harshest critic, so I'll say 4 1/4 too. I was just going to go with 4 stars out of 5. It's an inauspicious, at times, start for what definitely is a 5 out of 5.
So you're saying it gets better.
Oh, much. Oh, much.
They're right over there, Myrtle, the trades.
I'll be taking number 3 with me. Danny, where do you weigh in?
Maybe a 2 or 3 out of 5. It didn't grip me the way it did when I first read it. There's just something about it that I just didn't really care. I hate to keep saying that, but it didn't make me want to like keep reading or anything. Like it didn't grip me like it did when I first read it when I was in my 20s. I guess I'm just in a different time in my life that I don't really particularly feel like reading crazy, over-the-top, ultra-violent, male bonding stories.
Yeah, we were talking about it the other night where I think, reading this book through the lens of maturity, because I read it in my 20s and so did you the first time. Reading this book through the lens of maturity is very, very much different than... well, reading it now, or I guess then reading it when we originally did. And this has a red raw streak of just college boy antics right through the center of it. Yeah,
and I'm kind of past that point where I don't really care about. I have no interest in reading about that anymore. But, I mean, I'll keep reading it, because I do remember liking it, and I want to reach the point where Tulip becomes really badass, because at the beginning, she really is. I think part of my problem was she seems so weak, and I just don't really... There's no male bonding for me. I just don't really care. Sorry, guys.
Oh, it's fine.
It does kind of fail the Bechdel test, doesn't it?
It does, and in fact, I think Tulip becomes
woman.
She becomes the archetype and sort of the flag bearer for all women over the course of the series. She is an archetypical. She's the woman in this boy's tale. She's the feminist, and so on and so on. Jesse has a lot of those same views, but that's just sort of the service she provides in this book.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with a male bonding tale. It's just I have no interest in reading that right now.
All right, well, I guess that'll wrap it up for us then. Well, and this episode again is brought to you by
InStockTrades.com. At their website, InStockTrades.com, visit it and check out all the fantastic deals they have on trades and hardcovers, all that good stuff. And if it's on the website, it's in stock.
Absolutely. All right. If you want to leave us an email, we're at comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. You can leave us a voicemail. We're 267-702-6642. You can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and Comic Geek Speak. You can join the conversation at thecomicforums.vanillaforums.com. Talk back about this episode as well as many other topics. I'd also like to thank everyone who contributed to the show. We really appreciate it. Could not do without you. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.